What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the shelf, and today I'm here to rank all of the Nightmare on Elm Street films from the worst to the best. So far on my channel, I've done rankings for the Halloween franchise. I've also done Friday the 13th, but today we're looking at Nightmare on Elm Street. And before we get to the ranking, I kind of want to preface my history with this franchise, sort of like my relationship with it, just to provide a bit of a frame of reference for, how I went in and, sort of looked at all of these movies and like my history with them. For me, it's interesting because like when I think of the big three, right? Halloween, Nightmare, and Friday the 13th, it's hard to look at, one without in some ways looking at the other two as well and kind of always sort of comparing them to one another. Perhaps that's not really how you look at things, but for me, it's something that I find myself subconsciously doing. And just in terms of which franchise I like overall the most, I'd honestly probably say that I like the Friday the 13th franchise the most, then Nightmare on Elm Street, and then maybe Halloween last. But, that's neither here nor there. One of the first horror movies I ever remember seeing was Halloween, but another one of the first horror movies that I ever remember seeing was A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, which we will talk about later on in the list. I just think it's interesting the way that some horror movies that you see at a very early age tend to stick with you due to nostalgic reasons, and for those reasons we can tend to put them higher up. So I recently got the Nightmare on Elm Street 4K box set, and I just got finished rewatching every single movie in the franchise, including Freddy vs. Jason, so these are all very fresh in my mind, and yeah, I'm excited to get into it. So without further ado, let's start out with number 9. It should come as no surprise to anybody, but Freddy's Dead is my number 9. It is, almost objectively considered to be the worst movie. Some people would probably put the remake, here in this 9th spot, but for me, this movie was by far the hardest to actually get through. I think it took me like 2 separate sittings just to get through it because it's so bad, and we'll talk about that. This was actually my first time watching this movie. I had never wanted to watch it because I just heard so much how bad it was. So I never really felt the need to do that up until the time here when, I decided to do this ranking, and I kind of had to. So it's just as bad as everyone says it is. We are just so far removed from the original tone by this point. Like, we are in full satire parody territory here with this movie. First of all, the movie's very dated, which, you could say the same about the other films in this franchise, but there's something about this film with its 90s tinge to it that in particular stands out, where, things that are dated from the 80s we tend to look at with a level of fondness, where things from the 90s, we're not quite there yet. And yeah, this just does not feel like Nightmare on Elm Street. The Nightmare on Elm Street movies are very 80s at their core. So having gone on for so long, now that we're in the 90s, it just doesn't feel the same. In this movie, we're like exploring some of the history of Freddy and like going into the lore and the family and stuff. And it's just like, no, we don't need to do this. We've done it before with like, I think 3, we first see Amanda Kruger. They touch on it again in 5. And, that stuff was all fine there, but like now we're like really getting into it and like showing Freddy at various points in his life. And it's just like, what are we doing? None of this is necessary. Honestly, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise across the board probably has some of the worst acting out of any horror franchise. Most notably, the big 3 definitely has the worst acting in my opinion. This movie has some god-awful performances. Yaphet Kotto, probably the only one here giving like an actual performance. He's kind of just acting circles around all the other people in this film. The makeup here is really bad, but it also has not been good for a while at this point either. 4, 5, and 6, it kind of just goes on a downward trend. It almost just looks like Robert Englund is like wearing a Halloween mask of his own face with like the bare minimum done. Like they really stopped trying, it feels like to me. The kills here are ridiculous. There's this video game kill. There's like a guy with a hearing aid, which is like, it's actually kind of creative, but it's just played with such humor that you just don't want in a Nightmare on Elm Street film. Like Freddy's like creeping up behind the guy and like messing with him, and it's like there's a version of that you could do that's a little creepier, but this is just strictly played like to be funny. Like we are no longer trying to be a horror film at this point. Freddy's also lit like very flatly and blandly, and it's just so, it's lacking any of the shadow or like expressionism that used to make him like so elusive and mysterious feeling. Like if you look at the first two films specifically and the way that they light and show Freddy, like they barely show you, like they'll show you his silhouette, they'll show you him masked in shadow. Maybe they'll give you a close-up here and there, but it's like very sparingly. They don't really show him, they don't overdo him, because they know that that's the secret sauce. And by the time you get into 4, 5, and 6, Freddy is such an icon. He's like a mascot at this point that like they're showing him front and center. So by this point in Freddy's Dead, we're so far removed from, anything I would consider to be classic Freddy. The overall production of this film feels closer to like an episode of TV than it does like the conclusion of this iconic franchise, quote unquote, supposed to be the conclusion, whatever. We all knew that it wouldn't be. But yeah, I mean, at the time, perhaps that was the intention, and this is just such an under-delivery. Like, they just undersold, or they oversold and under-delivered, let's just put it that way. There's also a distinct lack of Nancy here, which, I don't blame her for not being involved at this point, but it almost feels like you'd want to bring someone back from, the original films to kind of close out this series, right? So instead of that, they introduced this new character that I've just met, and you're expecting me to care about her. And, oh, also she's Freddy's daughter, so like that comes out of nowhere. Yeah, it just feels like there should be something more to kind of bring everything full circle, and you just don't get that here. You got the 3D gimmick at the end, which is pretty terrible. And, the one thing that this movie does deliver on is it did kind of kill Freddy. Like, we got the remake, we got Freddy vs. Jason, and, we did get New Nightmare, but those are all so different tonally and, like, conceptually. Like, this was the last time we ever saw, like, Freddy from that original run of 6 films. Everything after this was kind of its own thing. So, yeah, for all intents and purposes, this movie did kind of kill Freddy, and he's been dead to this day. We still don't have any new movies or anything, even a rumble or a whisper of anything, so... I know we had other movies after this, but like, this does kind of feel like, the end of an era. All right, so moving on to number 8, we have the remake, A Nightmare on Elm Street from 2010. This is not a movie that Nightmare on Elm Street fans tend to have a lot of love for. I do think it has some interesting ideas, and there are some things that it does right, but for everything it does right, it has like 2 things that it does wrong. So it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back with this thing. I think the most offensive thing that this movie does is the way that it shamelessly recreates so many of the iconic shots and like scenes from the original. You have the awful CGI Freddy coming through the wall where they, did that practically in the original, and it works so much better. It's amazing how much better it looks. They also have the shot of Nancy in the tub, and it's just like, just totally shamelessly ripping off all those shots and then not really providing anything. Well, it does provide some things of merit that it creates originally that the original doesn't have. So that's what I kind of mean, where it's like, it's doing a lot of bad things, but it's also doing some good things, I will say. A big thing about this movie is Jackie Earle Haley's performance as Freddy. I honestly don't think he's that bad at all. He is not even the 10th worst thing about this movie, in my opinion. The CGI sort of rendering of him doesn't look great, but that's not really his fault. They should have just went practical, but they probably did that to sort of like save money. And I'm sure to some extent it was practical, and then it's like augmented with CGI. I'm not actually sure, but I do know that there was a level of CGI involved, and that to me is like a no-go off the rip. Kyle Gallner is very good in this movie. Rooney Mara, not so much. So, the cast is very much a mixed bag, in my opinion. There's a lot of forgettable supporting roles. Kyle Gallner actually steals the movie, in my opinion, and thankfully he's around for most of it, and he doesn't really get killed off early on or anything like that. So the movie also introduces sort of a weird angle to it as far as the origins of Freddy and like what he does with the kids that he kills. I'm not going to get into specifics. There are words that you probably can't say on YouTube, but I think you know what I mean. Probably not necessary, but it's a new thing that the movie offers. So I kind of give it like a half a point for that, but it's like, so it's weird because you're giving me something new, which is nice, because it's like, if you're going to do a remake, you should probably, you know, have something new to offer, but what you're offering is not necessary or good. So not really sure how to quantify that one. Points for creativity, I guess. I don't know. This movie was directed by a guy who directed a lot of music videos, and you can kind of get that sense throughout the film. So I think that actually works for the aesthetic that they're going for here. Probably the best plot point that this movie introduces is like the micro sleep or the micro naps, where people are like falling asleep for, you know, seconds at a time. And it's like your brain doesn't even, you know, register it. But, you know, because you are technically asleep, Freddy's able to attack you. So it's like, that's a really cool inclusion that I wish would, you know, be explored a little bit more. And hopefully if we ever do get a new movie, they take that kind of plot point and flesh it out even further, because I think that's actually something that is very ripe for exploration. And you have all, like, with that, there's all these like transition scenes where, you know, they're kind of like flickering between the real world and the dream world, which is like this industrial sort of like hellscape with like boilers and chains and stuff that Freddy likes to hang out in. So like that stuff was all really cool, and I thought that all worked. It's not really playing anything for jokes, like it's very serious, which is like what I think you need for these movies. Like the first couple really nail that, and then from there it got silly. It needs to be like this. If Freddy can have little quips and one-liners that he throws at you, but that should all be predicated by the fact that he is scary. Like that's the juxtaposition, right? It's like, this is a very scary situation and he's making jokes. So like, that's where the balance comes from. You need to get that balance right, because if the situation is silly and he's being silly, that's where you've gone wrong. Like the situation should be serious and Freddy should be silly, because, and silly's probably pushing it to the extreme, but you know, you get what I'm saying here. The contrast is kind of what you need with him specifically. There are a couple of moments here in this movie too that I actually thought were pretty cool. There's the one where Nancy like falls through the ceiling into the bed. That looked pretty cool. Again, you're getting some of that music video aesthetic, I think, is probably where that comes from. There's also this moment when Freddy's like right about to stab Nancy, and Kyle Gallner's character, like Quentin, like stabs her with his adrenaline right before he's about to stab her. And like that was a cool, satisfying moment in a movie that is sorely lacking things like that. So I think perhaps it made it stand out that much more. Yeah, overall, just not a good movie. Has some promising ideas, but isn't doing enough collectively to kind of make it all mesh together into one experience that, you know, is working on every level. All right, coming in at number 7, we have The Dream Master. Now, before you attack me, I know that there are a lot of people who really enjoy The Dream Master. For me personally, I really can't get behind this movie. I think it's fine at best, but it has a lot of problems in my opinion. Starting out with a positive though, in the beginning of this film, when Freddy's like being reborn, they're using like these practical effects to kind of, you know, all his skin and his tissue and sinew and all that is like reforming and stuff. It's hard to explain, but you know what I mean if you've seen the film. I think it makes kind of a mistake by killing off the Dream Warriors early on. I guess they were trying to like make a statement that like Freddy's back and he's taking no prisoners this time. So you could perhaps read it as this bold new thing, like to let you know that he's not fucking around this time. I don't really have too much of an opinion on it either way. I thought Kincaid was like really goofy and like way over the top and like just not really a great character. That actor's performance is just not, it doesn't work for me. He's just being like too ridiculous. I also don't really find Lisa Wilcox to be that great of an actor at all. She's almost like a black hole or a black void where like a personality should be. She's pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie to you. She's very bad. A sorry replacement for Patricia Arquette, I will say. With the exception of the Roach Motel kill, the kills in this movie are pretty weak, especially the one where, what's his name, Ricky is like doing karate against an invisible Freddy. Like, I feel like I've heard that one was like a last minute thing because they ran out of money, so they just kind of slapped that together. Like, Robert Englund's literally not even in the scene. He's just invisible. It's just very bad. It's not a good kill at all. Rick is also like a Temu version of Christian Slater, and his character is just very cringe. Did not enjoy him at all. This movie's cast in general is pretty rough, I will say. There's a scene in a movie theater where like Alice like falls into the theater screen, which is kind of cool. It looks cool. But then there's also a scene that kind of ruins that, where it's like she's becoming the Dream Master and she's like using the nunchucks in the mirror, and it's like we're seeing her from behind and it's clearly not her. Like just ridiculous. I see shit like this and I'm sure some fans have fun with that, and for me it just kind of pisses me off because I'm like, this is so fucking stupid. So I mentioned Patricia Arquette and Lisa Wilcox, and so they recast Patricia Arquette with Tuesday Knight, who I actually think is pretty cool, but then we kill her off and then we replace her with Lisa Wilcox. So it's like, not only do we have the sting of losing Patricia Arquette, but now we're replacing what was probably a better choice for a main girl, and we're replacing her with Lisa Wilcox, who just sucks, in my opinion. Sorry to Lisa Wilcox if she happens to be watching this. I gotta stand on this. The problem with these movies too is that after part 3, you start to get the impression that there's no consistent rules as far as how to take down Freddy. He always just comes back anyway, and the way that he gets taken out is pretty different movie to movie. So it's like, for me as a audience member, it's hard to be invested, and like, there's no stakes. Like, there's nothing consistent here. It's all just kind of like open to interpretation, I guess. And people praise the Nightmare on Elm Street movies for being so creative as far as the dream kills and everything. But it's like, I would argue that a lot of the time, that's actually a detriment, because what winds up happening is the filmmakers have to come up with these elaborate dream kills, and then they fall flat. They either run out of money, like the case with Rick's death, you know, they ultimately wind up just kind of slapping something together that's very goofy. Occasionally you'll get a really good one with the Roach Motel, but then I feel like for every Roach Motel, you have like 2 more Rick's deaths. You have, you know, any kill from Freddy's Dead. Like, I would honestly take any kill from the Friday the 13th movies over like most of the kills in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. One thing I will say about the Dream Master though is that I do like Freddy's death here. However impermanent it might be, the effects work is pretty well done. So I will give the movie its flowers for that. Coming in at number 6, we have The Dream Child. Oh boy, Lisa Wilcox is back, and she's just as bad. I'm sorry. But yeah, Lisa Wilcox is back. She's got a new group of friends that she's made, I guess, between Dream Master and here. You know, so they'll all be killed by Freddy by the time this is over, and, you know, not really any need to get invested in them. The characters are awful, the dialogue is awful, and they make sure to let you know all of that, like, immediately once this movie starts. But despite that, this movie has some interesting ideas, and those ideas are what gives this one the edge for me over Dream Master. Specifically, this movie has sort of a dual narrative thing going on where we're exploring Freddy's background. And I know I said in Freddy's Dead that, you know, that's not necessary, but specifically to the lengths in which that movie does it, it's kind of egregious. Here, I think it's actually interesting because they juxtapose that with Alice being pregnant and sort of the way that Freddy's able to attack her through the dreams of her unborn child. That's actually an interesting idea. And, you know, that's sort of counterbalanced with Freddy's origin in terms of how he was born and his mom. So there's this maternal sort of thread that kind of runs through the movie that's actually pretty interesting for the 5th installment in an 80s slasher franchise. So I definitely give the movie points for that. The movie has some cool visuals. You got baby Freddy. There's this one scene where Freddy has like a super long arm and one normal arm. I thought that was kind of an interesting look. But also, like, Freddy can only scrape his claws on the wall so many times before it stops being scary. And I think this was the point for me where I was like, okay, dude, like, I get it. You got the claws. There's only so much you can do with that, and the well had definitely started to run dry by this point. So yeah, just structurally and plot-wise, this movie is much sounder than 4. Alice has a clear objective that she's trying to achieve, and you have this protagonistic entity in the form of Amanda Kruger, who is there to sort of serve as a foil against Freddy, coupled with Alice. So it's like the two of them are kind of teaming up in a sense, in an indirect way, to take down Freddy. So, like, that's pretty cool. Dan's death in this movie is actually pretty good. They're doing, like, this biomechanical thing where he's, like, fusing with the motorcycle. I thought that all was very interesting and like, cool to look at. Alice's dad is also a character in this movie, and we get a little bit more with him where, you know, I think they hinted in the fourth movie that he's like an alcoholic, and in this movie he's like in recovery, so like that's touching on some serious issues. They even have a line of dialogue where he's talking with Alice, and they're talking about how it would be nice to have a boy running around the house again, because his son and Alice's sister, or Alice's brother, Rick, died in the last movie, so like that kind of came out of nowhere and was sort of like a surprisingly like poignant sort of plot detail. Like, they didn't have to include that, but they have this little throwaway line where Alice's alcoholic in recovery dad is like giving this line about how it would be nice to have a boy back in the house. It's like, you don't expect that sort of thing, and they kind of just throw it at you out of nowhere, and they don't really make much of it overall in the film, but like I definitely honed in on that, because when you're watching these movies, you're almost like scrounging for any sort of like meat to chew on, where outside of just like extravagant kills and blood and stuff, because across the board the acting's all pretty bad. You know, the story is for the most part non-existent, so it's like all you really have is the kills. So anytime for me I get something like this, I like latch onto it immediately. So like I definitely wanted to highlight that component. Coming in at number 5, we have Freddy versus Jason. This was probably like the second or third Nightmare on Elm Street movie that I ever saw. I saw 2 when I was very young. We'll get to that one later. This was one that I can recall watching several times at like sleepovers and things like that, you know. So, and this was also one of the first instances that I can recall of watching a horror movie for the fun of it and not being scared by it. Where, you know, I think at a certain point in time, if you had shown me this movie, I definitely would have been scared of it. But by the time that I eventually started to like it, I was no longer scared by things like this. In fact, I was sort of drawn to them, and I wanted to watch them to have fun with them, because that's what this movie is. It's fun. It's stupid as fuck, but it also, oddly enough, is like probably the best version of this story that you could possibly have. I think that's proof positive when you look at all the scripts that came and went with this movie, where they were like trying to figure it out, and like this is definitely the best one that I think that they could have landed on. It makes the most sense while also being ridiculous as fuck. The movie over delivers on its premise. You get a lot of Freddy fighting Jason here. You get a lot of Freddy kills. You get a lot of Jason kills. I think they both get an equal amount of like screen time and presence given to them. It's very dated in terms of a movie from 2003. It very much feels like that, but that's part of its charm at this point. The soundtrack, everything about it, the look of it, the way that it was shot, it's very much a 2000s movie. But again, that's part of what is good about it, you know, because you can't recreate an 80s vibe necessarily, or at least if you can, they weren't interested in doing so at the time when this was made. So in the same way that the original is sort of dated from an 80s standpoint, this is the same. But like I said earlier, we sort of romanticize the 80s, and I tend to look kind of down on the 90s and 2000s just in terms of horror movies and the aesthetic. I don't think it ages well, but that's just my opinion. Obviously there are exceptions to the rule, and you know, regardless, I can still have fun with this movie, and that's all that you should be expecting. If you're going into this expecting something other than what you get, I think the onus is on you, and you should probably manage your expectations a little bit. But yeah, this is just fun. You can tell Robert Englund is having a blast with it. One of my favorite channels out there, Red Letter Media, recently did a review on this movie, and I really think they nailed it. I would definitely recommend going and watching their review on this movie. It is probably the best sort of analysis of this movie that I've seen on the internet. So coming in at number 4 is The Dream Warriors. Now I realize that for many of you, Dream Warriors might even be your favorite, and I really like it. This top 4 is the cream of the crop, obviously, but I really think that these are objectively as well like the best that this franchise has to offer. Just even outside of my own subjective opinion, I think that generally speaking, whenever you look at rankings of this franchise, these 4 are the ones that you expect to see, just perhaps in a different order than maybe I have them in. So even though this is my number 4, you know, on a good day, it could be my number 3. I really like Dream Warriors. If you're a fan of like Resident Evil, then you know that Resident Evil 4 is like a masterpiece of a game, but it's also the game that's sort of responsible for pushing Resident Evil out of horror and into action with games like 5 and 6. I kind of look at Dream Warriors the same way, where it's still very great and works on almost every level, but it was the impetus where you started to see Freddy moving from scary into jokey. So while it's not necessarily a problem for this movie, I tend to look at it in terms of what it continued to do for the franchise after the credits rolled on this one. So that is something that I kind of hold against this movie a little bit, but, you know, it's not that big of a deal. And yeah, I mean, what can I say? This one's pretty iconic. You had Wes Craven come back in the writing department, if I'm not mistaken. You also had Heather Langenkamp back, which was really cool to see. You know, this movie, the original and New Nightmare, almost function as sort of a trilogy of sorts in terms of like you could just watch those three movies and kind of get a full story out of them. In the same way that Halloween has like the Thorn trilogy, this is like the Nancy trilogy or whatever. And it might even actually have a name that fans have assigned to it that I'm just not familiar with. But yeah, the idea of the Dream Warriors kind of like teaming up and using their dream powers to like fight Freddy is a really cool and novel idea, because while many people have nightmares where they're helpless and can't do anything, we also have dreams where we can fly and we can, you know, do things like that. And so it makes sense if you're looking at, you know, what can happen in a dream, literally anything. So while the first couple movies institute the idea of people being victims in their dreams, now we're kind of turning it on its head and saying, well, what if you weren't a victim anymore? What if you could actually fight back? And you use the fact that you're in a dream to your advantage and not Freddy's advantage. So like that stuff, all very cool. All right, coming in at number 3, we have Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I have always enjoyed this movie, but on this most recent rewatch, I like this movie way more than I ever have before. And I think that that's because I watched this movie after sitting through 4, 5, and 6 and the remake. So like you sift through all that garbage and then you see New Nightmare and you're like, holy shit, this is like the Citizen Kane of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Yeah, bringing back Freddy in this way with this meta sort of aspect where it's a movie about the movies is genius, very cool. A lot of people will point out that, you know, this was Wes Craven practicing for Scream, even though that was like Kevin Williamson's script more so than Wes Craven. But, you know, regardless, I'm not saying that he didn't have, you know, input on the story and stuff like that. But, you know, this was him sort of doing that before even Kevin Williamson was like really a thing. So yeah, I just really love this movie. I love the way that, you know, they sort of tease Freddy for a while. Like they don't show you Freddy till like an hour in, I think. And yeah, he's different, but it's like this movie is different, so it makes sense that he's not the Freddy that we know, especially when you consider that it literally is not. It's like a demon who's kind of taken the form of Freddy and using that to like break into the real world. All very conceptually really interesting ideas. This movie has really great ideas, and I love the way that all of the characters in it are like these people that people know. If you're like a diehard like horror film fan, like you know who Bob Shaye is, you know who Wes Craven is, obviously you know who Robert Englund is, and they're all like characters in this movie and they're playing themselves, but they're treating the events with this like very real gravitas, like they're treating everything very seriously, and it adds to the overall effect of New Nightmare. This movie has some set pieces in it too, where there's like a coffin and a bed later on in the film where they sort of turn into like this childlike abyss, this dreamlike abyss that kind of goes on forever. And it feels like it's ripped like straight out of a child's nightmare, which is an interesting sort of angle that this movie takes that the other ones really don't, where it's about the nightmares of teenagers, where this one's more so about like Dylan's nightmares, who was like a literal child. And you don't really get that at all in any of the other films. So that's a really interesting, unique thing that this movie offers that the other ones really don't. I also like the scene where little Miko Hughes is watching the original Nightmare on Elm Street on the CRT, and his mom wakes up in the middle of the night and catches him. That was like a he's literally me moment, because like I used to do that, and like that part was just amusing to me. I don't know, I liked that part. I really like John Saxon's inclusion here too, where him and Nancy are kind of friends, and like he's sort of taken on this like advisory father figure role despite not being her actual real father. And then the way the movie plays with that later on, where they start to like have this situation where art is imitating life and vice versa, where, you know, they have to embody those roles in order to beat the demon. It's like just really, really good stuff. This movie's just great. I love this movie. Yeah, this movie is just awesome. It's got awesome matte paintings. It's got a cool Nosferatu homage. The entire finale is so great because it's all these practical locations and sets, and you can tell that all of these actors are on real sets, with the exception of the matte paintings, but like that adds the surreal, dreamlike quality to it. So in a sense, that's practical as well. It's just a different kind of practical, where it's an actual fucking painting that they're using to superimpose the image onto. So like they don't do that anymore. So this finale is awesome. I love how it kind of bookends the film, where in the beginning it's like it's very much a film set, and they make note of that, and like that's the reveal, is like that it's a film set is funny, and then we sort of go to that same place in the end, and it's just a great way to sort of bookend and finish out the movie. I don't know. This movie's awesome. All right, coming in at number 2, we have the original Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. Now, for many, the original is also the GOAT. I feel like I see 1, 2, and 3 are often in the 1, 2, and 3 spots, right? Maybe just in different orders. So I feel like this hopefully doesn't offend too many people. Obviously, you can see where my ranking is going now at this point. But yeah, I just can't quite get there with this one as the GOAT for me. It's still very good, and it's iconic. There are so many lines, there are so many shots and set pieces in this movie that are now iconic that it almost makes me wish that, like, out of any horror movie I've seen, I really wish that I could watch this movie for the first time, because I really can't like remember a time where I didn't know this movie. Like, I grew up mainly with 2, but I also watched this one a lot, you know, growing up until like 7th and 8th grade. So like this one was very familiar with me, and even though I haven't gone my entire life with this movie like as part of my, you know, filmography or whatever, it feels like I have, because it's so often seen in like the zeitgeist and in pop culture, and all the famous shots, you know, this is God, I'm your boyfriend Nancy. Like, there's just so many shots and things in this film that sort of have transcended the movie itself, to where I wish I could just experience it for the first time without any of that extra baggage, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, I mean, this one is, it's hard to say that, you know, if you were to tell me this was your favorite, you would get zero pushback from me. You really wouldn't. It's one of the best of all time, and it's for a reason. But coming in at number 1 is my personal favorite of the franchise, and one of my favorite horror movies of all time is Freddy's Revenge. I grew up with this movie. We had, I think, a blank VHS tape that had like this movie and a couple other movies like recorded onto it, and for whatever reason, this was one that I just was drawn to, and it's so embedded in my mind. The image at the end, for example, where there's this dog with like a weird face on it. Not very scary now, but that shit used to terrify me and gave me nightmares when I was a kid. I will say that nostalgia plays a big part in this for me, in having it at 1, but I also think legitimately the movie earns that spot. I've watched it obviously many times since as an adult. I really think that this is the scariest Freddy has ever been. People like to give this movie shit for like breaking the rules and having Freddy come into the real world like of his own volition. But, you know, to that I say, who cares? Because, you know, later sequels, there's not really any rules there either. Like, the way that Freddy is killed is always different, but he always comes back. So it's like, why do we care about rules with this particular franchise? I always found that weird. Everything is so nebulous anyway. It's literally a franchise where dream logic is used often. So like, I don't understand why that's a sticking point for many people. But, you know, regardless, I think Mark Patton is great in this movie. He really gives a great performance. I genuinely get the impression that he feels terrorized by what's happening. He is actually giving a good performance in this movie. I legitimately think that. And a lot of the, when you compare this to like Lisa Wilcox, for example, it's like night and day. So maybe it's a little over the top and maybe it's a little kind of cheesy, but like for what it is, especially when you compare it to the other entries in the franchise, he is far and away the best final boy that we've ever gotten. I also have a huge crush on Kim Myers. I think she is an angel in human form. I always loved her. People say that she looks like Meryl Streep. I think that's why she got the role, is because she looks like Meryl Streep, and I'll co-sign that. Yeah, and she's great in this movie. She's there to sort of ground Jesse and help him fight off Freddy's sort of suppression that he's trying to do and taking over his body and stuff. Obviously, you have the sort of gay subtext or just text that people will point out. I never picked up on any of that when I was a kid. I really don't think it's important. You know, when assessing the quality of the film itself, I still think it all works with or without any of that stuff. So it feels like I have to address it, but I also don't think it's like a pro or a con. It's just kind of there. And, you know, if people get stuff out of that, then that's awesome. But I really don't think it's like a big deal or anything. Yeah, this movie just rips. It's awesome. I love the opening with the bus and all of that stuff. It's just a great way to open the film. It's like daylight horror, which is really cool. Anytime that you're able to kind of take a situation where you think you might be safe and then make it so that you're not is like really interesting to me. And yeah, I don't know what else to say, man. This one's definitely my favorite. I think it holds up. All right, guys, so that is my ranking of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Let me know what you think of it and drop your own rankings in the comments as well. I'm interested to see them. I love seeing where people rank my favorites and where they rank the ones that I hate. I think it's really cool. It's interesting to see. And yeah, that's what makes all these rankings so fun, is you rarely find two that are identical. So definitely drop yours down below. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't. We talk about new movies, old movies, physical media, and horror in general. So with all that being said, guys, please take care and watch more movies.